The world is our parish. The world. Right? We are not a people as United Methodists of what I would call a least common denominator faith. Right? We don't just do the littlest we can. Instead, we reach for the sky. We reach for the highest we can. That is one of the things I love, and probably the thing that I share most with people who ever ask me, why are you a United Methodist? Why do you, stay with this denomination? And it's because of that we reach for the utmost, the highest in almost everything we do. And I hope that you've heard in some sense that theme running through the last several weeks as we have been talking about John Wesley's 3 rules for Methodist society, right? So let's review a little bit as we come to the end of this particular series and just look back for a moment on those 3 rules. The first rule, John Wesley's first rule, do no harm. Now, if I'm writing that rule, I'm wanting to hedge my bets a little. I would be like, well, do as little harm as possible. Right? Just as little as possible. Be nice. That's not what John Wesley said. No, he said, do no harm. None. And we talked about how difficult that is in a conflicted and complex world, the world that we live in today. And then, of course, the second rule, do good. Do good. And we as United Methodists, we have to turn up the volume on that a bit. So we have to not just say do good. We say do all the good you can. Everywhere. At all times, for as long as you shall live, right? It's sort of like marriage, right? It's big. It's all of it. It's all encompassing. Do all the good you can. No pressure whatsoever. Relax, right? Thankfully, Wesley's third rule is there. Attend all the ordinances of God, or stay in love with God. And that is in one way kind of a refueling, at least for me, a way to refuel ourselves, replenish ourselves so that we can do the first 2 rules. But even that one is a challenge because of John Wesley's inclination to, go above and beyond. He didn't just say, for example, oh, by the way, take communion once a month, like we do, right? He didn't even say once a week, friends. He said, constant communion. Constant communion. Take it as often as you can. And he did, sometimes between 2 and 3 times a week. Oh, how John loved the superlatives. As much as you can, as high as you can, constantly. And now we come to Extra Credit Sunday. That's what this week is about. This is extra credit, right? We've moved past the 3 general rules, but three weeks is just not long enough for a sermon series, so you got to add that 4th one onto the end. And so we turn to these words of John Wesley that are also famous words that have defined who we are, that we paraphrase as, the world is my parish. The world is our parish. The world. Not just the good folk of Hope United Methodist Church, not just the good folk of Greenwood Village, Colorado, or South Denver, not even just the state of Colorado, not even the United States, the world. Nothing like setting the bar high for us, Mr. Wesley. But he can be excused. He can be excused for his lofty goals. For in this case, he has the rationale, the justification of no one other Then the prophet Isaiah and the words that you heard Neil read today. In the days to come, the mount of the Lord's house will be established in the highest mountain, and all shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. All the nations shall stream to it. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. All the nations of the world will gather around the Lord's mountain, because the word of the Lord shall go forth into all the world. Sound familiar? Jesus would reflect, I believe, on those words, just as in some sense the hymn, the special music for today, reflects on those words in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, verse 19. Go therefore and disciple all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I have commanded you. We have within our DNA as United Methodists, and in fact I believe as the people of God, a drive to seek to bless those beyond the confines of our family, beyond the confines of our friends or of our tribe, however we may define that. It was what drove John Wesley to travel those 250,000 miles that Pastor Hale spoke about and preach over 40,000 sermons. And one of you, and I wish I could remember who, so if you want to raise your hand, but one of you did the math a couple weeks ago on the back of your napkin, on the back of your bulletin as we were talking. That is no less than 2 sermons a day, 7 days a week, for 53 years. That's our DNA. That's our DNA. And I think we have similar DNA in Hope United Methodist Church, do we not? Recently, I had the joy to have lunch with the Metcalfs, who were charter members of Hope United Methodist Church, and told me how your life began as a congregation, including a long-lasting friendship with the Cow family, a refugee family from Vietnam, who you befriended and took in and helped as they transitioned to a new life in our country and our community. And a friendship for some of you that still extends to this day. Now, you had a lot going on. You were trying to build a church. Many of you were trying to build families, and yet you reached out to this family to help them, and they helped and blessed you in return. It's amazing. I think, too, of many of the saints of this church that I have heard about in the past 8 weeks and more. Ann Fort's name. I hear Ann Fort named in honor and gratitude every week. Every single week. For how she reached out into the world and helped with many of you reaching out through Kenyan mission trips and other ways. I think of the South Metro Medical Equipment Loan Closet, started by Donna Ralston and others. The work of so many blessings. The list could go on and on and on. It is in our DNA to reach beyond ourselves, to bless beyond ourselves. And to understand why, we need only look a little closer at these words of John Wesley. The world is our parish. And so confession time here. You don't know this, or some of you may, but Laura and I happened upon this sermon series independently for Hope United Methodist Church and for Parker United Methodist Church. And because we chose it independently, they're 1 week ahead of us. So I got to listen to Laura's sermon this week for inspiration. And she has a lot of great stuff to say about the world as our parish. Go online to Parker United Methodist Church. Listen if you wish. You often ask me if we preach differently. The answer is yes. And you can go online and find out how. But she shared something that I want to share with you. And she took some time to, I'm indebted to her because she took some time to parse out Wesley's words, the world is our parish. And I specifically want to talk about parish. That last word in Wesley's phrase, parish. Now, we don't use that word much in our context anymore. That's more a word used by our Roman Catholic friends and others, although we have a similar word. It's called charge. It's called charge, and Pastor Hale and me, we are appointed to a charge, to Hope United Methodist Church charge. But it might be simpler just to translate the word parish into that word that we do know, church. Church. Right? The church. And when you think about the word church, many of us often will think about this space, this building, this place. This is our church. This is where church business happens. This is where we worship. This is where we meet the sacred. But then what happens when we walk out the doors? Right? Sometimes, though, we will, when we think about that word church, we'll go farther than that. You know the song. I think it's 475 in the hymnal. But you know the words. The church is not the building. The church is not a steeple. The church is not a resting place. The church is a people, right? A people. And then we go on with the refrain. I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. And that does live into it a little bit more, I think. But according to Wesley, according to Isaiah, that's not even quite the goal. The goal is the world is our parish. The world is church. The world. No borders. No boundaries. No demarcation lines between what is sacred and what is secular. There is no place where the touch of grace should not reach. There is no place where God's presence cannot be felt, nor where God's reign should not be lived out, nor where a prophetic word not need be spoken. The world is our church. And that part about the prophetic word may be the most uncomfortable part of understanding that the world is our parish. And let me tell you what I mean. You see, these words of Wesley, the world is our parish, came not from a great speech or a great sermon by John to the Methodist people. Instead, they are found in one of John Wesley's journals in 1739 when he was writing to a colleague, writing to a fellow Methodist, justifying his actions in the face of significant resistance. He was doing some new things in his world, and it was making people uncomfortable. And so in 1739 he wrote, I look upon all the world as my parish. Thus far I mean that in whatever part of it I am, I judge it meet, right, and my bounden duty to declare unto all that are willing to hear the glad tidings of salvation. And this is the work which I know God has called me to, and sure am I that his blessings attend it. You see, John Wesley didn't have a church in 1739. He instead was assigned to Oxford University, ostensibly to teach, although if you're thinking 250,000 miles, he's probably not in Oxford University very often, is he? But that was his professional role, was appointed to Oxford University. And so he didn't have a church, and yet he felt a need to preach. He felt a need to proclaim the gospel wherever he was, whenever he could. And so he did. And at first he would preach in churches if the priest would invite him in, and soon they became uncomfortable with what he had to say, so they quit inviting him in. And then they started kicking him out, to the point that at one point in his life, he even preached a sermon on top of his father's gravestone. Because he said, if there's any place I can preach, this one's mine. And I'm going to preach from here. And when he preached in towns, when he couldn't preach in churches, then people started actually abusing the Methodist preachers. Started isolating them, those that would not listen, ostracizing them. And so he went out into the fields. And in another phrase of his, he determined to be more vile, and he preached in the fields and wherever he could. And then, over time, thousands and thousands came. You see, the world is my parish is much more than just about our reach. It is also about our witness. Our witness. I'm sure you've heard these words attributed to St. Francis: preach the gospel at all times, use words when necessary. Right? We like that as United Methodists because we think, hey, that's pretty good. I don't have to use words. Sorry, friends. Sometimes words are necessary. Sometimes the witness is necessary. And I know that scares some of you. You know why? It scares me. It scares me. Now, I can do this all day long. Doing this out there, that scares me. Sharing my faith with those that I don't know well, knots right here in my stomach. Offer a word of disagreement over a matter of justice. Being visible in the public square beyond what is appropriate for sacred speech, that is scary. But it is also necessary. Because we do have a word to share. And if this is God's world as we believe it, as Isaiah proclaims it, then there is no place where sacred speech is not appropriate. Or as Paul shares in his letter to the Romans, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one in whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? So here's the good news, though. If you are really scared, as I am often of talking to strangers, start with your friends. And if you're not quite sure what to say, ask yourself these 3 questions. What excites me about my faith? What excites me about my faith? Why do you get off the couch and come here every Sunday? Why do you meet for the Bible studies and the fellowship groups? Why are you part of church? What excites you about your faith? Why do you invest? Because each of you invest generously. Question number 1. Question number 2, why do I think it makes a difference, right? Maybe that's to what it makes a difference in your life. Maybe it's friendships. Maybe it's a chance to make a difference in your community. Maybe it's a chance to make a difference in the world. How does it make a difference? And 3, how might they be involved? How might you invite them to be involved? Answer those 3 questions in 30 seconds, and you have your Hope elevator speech ready to go. And guess what? We are actually going to practice this next Sunday after church during our fall kickoff. Right? We're going to practice this. This afternoon, I'm going to invite some of you to be brave and give an elevator speech about your ministry, your group, your activity within our church. 30 seconds to each other so that we together can celebrate the ministries of our church together, and we can practice about sharing our story with others. We're going to do that next week. And so if it feels weird to invite your friends or your family to church, don't. Instead, invite them to your house. Invite them to your patio. Invite them to a service project. Invite them to something else. Invite them into your ministry. Invite them into your life. Be there for them. And God will be there for you. There once was a little boy who wanted to meet God. And so he knew that was going to be a long trip. And so he packed up his suitcase with Twinkies and a 6-pack of root beer and started on his journey. When he had gone about 3 blocks, he met an old woman sitting on a park bench. And she was just there staring at some pigeons. The boy sat down next to her and he opened his suitcase. He was about to take a good swig from his root beer when he noticed that she looked hungry. And so he offered her a Twinkie. She gratefully accepted and she smiled at the boy. And her smile was so pretty that the boy wanted to see it again, so he offered her a root beer. And once again, she smiled at him, and the boy was delighted. And so they sat there together on the park bench all afternoon until it began to grow dark. And the boy realized how tired he was. And as he got up to leave, he went a few steps, and then he ran back and he gave that old woman a big hug, and she gave him the biggest smile ever. And the boy went home, and when he opened the door, his mother looked at how joy-filled he was and asked, What did you do today to make you so happy? He replied, I had lunch with God. And before his mother could respond, he said, you know what? She's got the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. And when the woman went home, radiant too with joy, she met her son, who was also stunned by the look of peace on her face. Mom, what did you do today that made you so happy? I ate Twinkies in the park with God. And you know what? He's much younger than I expected. We, not our building, are the church. And the world is our parish. May you go and find God this week. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.